Hello, dear viewers. The following stories are inspired by real events, but the names of the characters have been changed to protect privacy. Night fell over Havenwood, Washington, on an October evening in 2015. A chill wind blew through the bare trees, carrying an ominous rustling sound. Sarah, a woman in her 30s with long black hair and captivating eyes, stood in front of her vanity mirror. She wore a tight, short red dress, over which she wore a black leather jacket. The yellow light from the table lamp cast a shadow over her carefully made-up face, unable to hide the loneliness in her eyes. "Another night," she muttered to herself, her voice tired but still full of determination. A gentle knock on the door interrupted Sarah's thoughts. "Sarah, are you sure?" came the voice of her best friend Emily from outside. "It's cold. Why don't you stay home and watch a movie?" Sarah opened the door, giving a forced smile. "I'm fine, Emily. Thanks." Emily looked at Sarah with concern. "I don't understand why you're out alone at night. This town isn't as safe as you think." "I know what I'm doing," Sarah replied, trying to sound confident. "I'm just going for a walk." Emily sighed. "Okay, but be careful. Call me if anything happens." "I know," Sarah said, and closed the door. She looked in the mirror again, fixed her hair, then grabbed her small purse and walked out of her apartment. Sarah walked down Havenwood's deserted Main Street. Most of the stores were closed, only a few streetlights casting a pale yellow glow onto the sidewalk. It was eerily quiet, only Sarah's footsteps echoing in the night. She turned onto a smaller street, where the lights were dimmer. The houses on either side of the street were silent, their windows as dark as bottomless pits. She felt a twinge of unease, but pushed it aside. "I'm just nervous," she told herself. She continued walking, her eyes darting around. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. Sarah turned, startled, but saw no one. She stood still and listened, but the only sound was the wind whistling through the dry branches. "I must have heard wrong," she thought, and walked faster. The footsteps came again, clearer this time, as if they were chasing her. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She hurried into a dark alley between two buildings. The smell of mold and trash filled her nostrils, making her feel sick. She pressed her back against the cold wall, trying to breathe quietly. The footsteps stopped right in front of the alley. Sarah held her breath, listening tensely. A tall, dark figure passed the mouth of the alley, then disappeared into the darkness. Sarah waited a long time, until she was sure there was no one else there. She slowly stepped out of the alley, looking around cautiously. The street was still deserted. Sarah continued walking, but now fear was creeping into her mind. Every little noise, every shadow made her jump. She felt like someone was watching her, lurking in the darkness. She passed a small bar, its red neon lights casting a gloomy look. A few men were standing outside smoking, watching her with questioning eyes. Sarah hurried past, trying not to look at them. When she reached the end of the street, she saw a black car parked on the side of the road, the engine still running. A man sat inside, facing her. The streetlights cast a creepy smirk on his face. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She quickly turned around, intending to run, but the man opened the car door and stepped out. He was tall and muscular, with deep black eyes and a cold expression. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" he asked, his voice deep and husky in the quiet night. Sarah tried to keep her composure. I'm going home." The man moved closer to her, the smile on his lips growing more menacing. "Let me take you home." Sarah felt a pang of terror. She knew she was in danger. She tried to back away, but her back hit the wall of an abandoned building. "Get away from me," Sarah screamed, her voice shaking. The man said nothing, just reached out and grabbed her arm. His hand was cold and strong like a vice. Sarah tried to pull away, but couldn't. He pulled her towards the car, the smile still on his face. Sarah tried to resist, struggling violently, but her strength was no match for the man. He shoved her into the car roughly, slamming the door. Sarah tried to open the door, but it was locked. She banged on the glass, screaming for help, but no one heard. The man got into the driver's seat, looking at her with cold eyes. He started the car, and the car sped off into the dark night. Sarah felt hopeless and terrified. She didn't know where he was taking her, and what was waiting for her ahead. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. She thought of Emily, of the normal life she had. Why did she go out tonight? Why did she put herself in this dangerous situation? The car sped down the deserted road, through the dark fields. The headlights illuminated the trees on both sides of the road, creating strange ghosts. Sarah tried to calm herself, thinking about what she could do to get out of this situation. She looked at the man driving. His face was still cold and emotionless. She couldn't guess what he was thinking. "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The man didn't answer, only smirked. That smile sent a chill down Sarah's spine. After a moment of eerie silence, the man spoke, his voice hoarse and threatening. "You don't need to know. You will know." That sentence made Sarah feel like her heart stopped beating. She knew she was in dangerous hands. The car suddenly turned onto a small, bumpy dirt road. Sarah bounced up and down in her seat. She looked out the window, trying to get her bearings, but all she could see was trees and darkness. The road became more difficult to navigate, the car swaying violently. Finally, it stopped in front of a dark, dilapidated wooden house. It looked abandoned and creepy, as if it had been abandoned for a long time. The man turned off the engine, then turned to Sarah. "We're here." Sarah felt a wave of dread wash over her. This was not a good place. She tried to open the car door, but it was still locked. "Open the door," Sarah shouted. The man sneered, then got out of the car. He walked around to Sarah's side, opened it, and pulled her out. Sarah tried to fight back, but the man was too strong. He dragged her toward the house. The front door creaked as he pushed it open. It was pitch black inside, and the smell of mold and dust filled Sarah's nostrils. "Come in," the man ordered, pushing Sarah forward. Sarah stepped inside, trembling. She tried to look around, but saw nothing. The darkness was thick and overwhelming. Suddenly, she heard a strange noise coming from upstairs. Light footsteps, as if someone was walking across the old wooden floor. Sarah startled, turning to look at the man. He was listening too, his expression a little tense. "Do you hear anything?" Sarah whispered. The man didn't answer, just listened silently. The footsteps upstairs grew louder, then stopped right above their heads. A creaking sound was heard, and a dark figure slowly appeared on the stairs. The figure was tall and thin, with long hair that fell over his face. Sarah couldn't make out the details, but she could feel the coldness and death radiating from the shadow. The man stood still, his eyes fixed on the shadow on the stairs. His cold expression was gone, replaced by utter terror. The shadow slowly moved down the stairs, each step creating an eerie creaking sound. As it got closer, Sarah could see its shape more clearly. It was a woman, wearing a long white dress, old and dirty. Her face was pale, expressionless, and her deep black eyes stared at Sarah. Sarah felt as if a cold hand was squeezing her heart. She couldn't move, couldn't say a word. Fear froze her in place. The ghostly woman stepped in front of Sarah, then slowly extended her hand. Her fingers were long and thin, with black nails as sharp as animal claws. Sarah closed her eyes, waiting for the worst. Sarah closed her eyes, her trembling hands covering her face, trying not to look at the terrifying white figure standing right in front of her. She could feel the coldness radiating from the woman, a coldness that was not like the cold of the weather. The man's heavy breathing sounded beside her, showing that he was equally terrified. What is this?" he stuttered, his voice broken with fear. Sarah peeked through her fingers. The ghostly woman was still standing there, as still as a statue carved from ice. Her deep black eyes seemed to be sucking in the dim light in the room, making them more terrifying than ever. Suddenly, the woman slowly raised her hand, her long, thin fingers trembling in the air. Sarah shivered, feeling as if an invisible spider web was crawling on her skin. The man beside Sarah suddenly backed away, tripping over an old chair and falling to the floor. A loud noise echoed in the quiet space, startling Sarah. The ghostly woman slowly turned her head towards the man, her jet black eyes never leaving him. The man tried to crawl back, his hands on the floor, his mouth constantly stammering meaningless pleas. Please spare me. I didn't do anything to you." The ghostly woman didn't respond, just slowly walked towards him. Each of her steps created a creepy, creaking sound on the rotten wooden floor. The man looked at her with horror, his face as pale as paper. Sarah stood there, frozen, unable to believe what she was seeing. She had never thought that ghosts could exist. But now, she was facing them, right before her eyes. As the ghostly woman approached the man, she leaned down slightly, bringing her pale face closer to his. Sarah could see her features more clearly: pale skin, thin, pale lips, and deep black eyes that had no light at all. The man screamed in horror, then tried to struggle, but the ghostly woman placed her cold hand on his forehead. Immediately, a strange black smoke rose from the man's body, spreading throughout the room, carrying with it a foul stench. Sarah backed away in fear, covering her nose and mouth. She felt as if all the air in the room had been sucked out. The man lay motionless on the floor, his body twitching slightly, then slowly quieted. When the black smoke cleared, Sarah saw that the man was still lying there, but his body had become dry and shriveled like an ancient mummy. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, filled with horror. The ghostly woman slowly straightened up, turning her head towards Sarah. Her black eyes were still staring at Sarah, unblinking. Sarah felt an extreme fear invade her mind. She knew that she was next. She tried to back away, but her feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. She wanted to scream, but her throat was tight, unable to make any sound. The ghostly woman slowly walked towards Sarah, each step heavy and terrifying. Sarah could feel the coldness radiating from her, getting closer and closer. She closed her eyes, praying in vain. Suddenly, she heard a small noise, like something falling on the floor. Sarah opened her eyes, and she saw an old key lying right at her feet. A thought flashed through Sarah's mind. Maybe this was the key to escape this house. She quickly bent down to pick up the key, her hands shaking so much that she almost dropped it. When Sarah had the key in her hand, she felt a glimmer of hope. She looked at the ghostly woman approaching, then quickly turned and ran towards the main door. She tried to insert the key into the lock, but her hands were shaking so much that she couldn't move it. The ghostly woman was right behind her, her cold breath hitting Sarah's neck. "No!" Sarah screamed, trying to turn around to face the ghost. But the ghost had already reached out to touch Sarah's shoulder. A cold current ran through Sarah's body, paralyzing her completely. It felt like thousands of needles were piercing her flesh. Sarah collapsed to the floor, the key falling from her hand. She tried to crawl back, but the ghostly woman stood in front of her. Her black eyes looked at Sarah with hunger, as if she was hungry for something. What do you want?" Sarah asked, her voice weak. The ghostly woman did not answer, but only leaned down, bringing her cold face closer to Sarah's. Sarah could see more clearly the small cracks on her pale skin, and her thin, pale lips were slightly parted, revealing black, sharp teeth. Sarah felt a strong stench coming from the ghostly woman's mouth, making her nauseous. She tried to turn her face away, but she couldn't move. The ghostly woman slowly opened her mouth, and Sarah saw a long, black tongue sticking out. She moved closer, and Sarah felt her cold breath on her face. Sarah screamed, then closed her eyes tightly, waiting for the worst to happen. Suddenly, she heard a loud noise, like someone banging on the door. The noise startled the ghostly woman and she turned her head around. Sarah opened her eyes quickly, and she saw Emily standing at the door, her face pale with fear. "Sarah!" Emily screamed, and rushed into the house. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her face white, her eyes wide with horror as she saw the scene before her. Sarah lying motionless on the floor, and a white figure of a woman bending over her. "Sarah, what happened?" Emily screamed, her voice hoarse with fear, and she rushed towards Sarah. Hearing Emily's voice, the ghostly woman slowly turned her head, her black eyes staring at Emily. A horrible screech came from her throat, causing Emily to stop mid-step, her heart pounding in her chest. "Get away from her!" Emily shouted, trying to appear strong even though she was trembling inside. She gripped the flashlight in her hand tightly, shining it straight at the ghostly face. The flashlight seemed to have no effect on the woman. She stood there, motionless, her eyes never leaving Emily. Emily did not dare to move forward, nor did she dare to move back. She stood still, struggling with the fear that was engulfing her. She knew that she had to do something to help Sarah, but she did not know how to deal with the thing standing in front of her. Suddenly, Emily remembered the ghost stories her aunt used to tell. In those stories, ghosts were often afraid of light and holy objects. Emily did not have any holy objects in her hand, but she did have a flashlight. She decided to give it a try. Emily shined the flashlight hard on the ghostly woman's face, while shouting loudly, "Go away! Get out of here!" The ghostly woman frowned slightly, then slowly took a step back. It seemed that the light had caused her some discomfort. Noticing the effect of the light, Emily continued to shine the flashlight on the ghostly woman, continuously shouting words of repulsion. The ghost seemed to be hurt by the light. She screeched and retreated into the darkness. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Emily quickly ran to Sarah's side, shaking her shoulder. "Sarah, wake up, we have to go." Sarah groaned softly, then slowly opened her eyes. She saw Emily looking at her worriedly, and behind Emily was a dark figure lurking. "Emily, what's going on?" Sarah stuttered, her voice still weak. "There's no time to explain. We have to get out of here now," Emily said, then tried to help Sarah up. With Emily's help, Sarah tried to stand up, but her legs were still shaking. They supported each other and walked towards the main door, not daring to take their eyes off the dark figure hiding in the corner of the room. As they neared the door, The ghostly woman suddenly rushed out, her speed astonishing. She let out a high-pitched shriek, raising her hand toward Sarah. Emily quickly pushed Sarah aside, then raised her flashlight and shined it directly into the ghost's face. The ghostly woman shrieked again and backed away, but this time she was not as frightened as before. "We have to hurry," Emily said, pulling Sarah's hand and running out of the house. They ran as fast as they could out of the haunted house, not daring to look back. The cold wind blew against their faces, but they no longer felt cold. Fear was driving them to run faster. When they reached the dirt road, Emily stopped, panting. Sarah stopped too, hugging Emily tightly, her body still trembling. We made it," Sarah said, her voice still trembling. Emily hugged Sarah tightly, trying to reassure her. "Yeah, we're out of here. But we have to get out of here right now. We have to call the police." They hurried back to town, trying to stay calm despite the shock. When they reached the main street, they saw police lights flashing in the distance. "What's going on?" Emily asked, glancing nervously toward the lights. "I don't know," Sarah replied, feeling a sense of foreboding. As they got closer, they saw a crowd gathered outside the bar Sarah had passed earlier. The police were cordoning off the scene. A police officer approached them. "Are you two okay? We got a call about someone being in trouble at an abandoned house outside of town." Emily and Sarah looked at each other, then told the whole story to the policeman. From Sarah walking alone, meeting the strange man, being kidnapped by him and taken to the haunted house, until they met the ghost woman and Emily saved Sarah. The policeman listened to their story with a serious face, sometimes frowning. When they told about the ghost woman and the strange death of the man, the policeman seemed a little suspicious, but he still took down every detail. "We will investigate," the policeman said after listening to the story. "You two should go home and rest. If there is anything new, we will contact you." Emily took Sarah home. Both of them felt exhausted and shocked after what they had experienced. Sarah could not believe that she had almost lost her life tonight. She remembered the cold face of the man and the scary eyes of the ghost woman, and she felt a shiver. "Are you okay, Sarah?" Emily asked, looking at her friend worriedly. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know, Emily. I'm still scared." "I understand," Emily said, hugging Sarah tightly. "But you're safe. I'll stay here with you tonight." Sarah nodded, grateful to have Emily by her side. She knew it would be a long, sleepless night, but at least she wouldn't have to face it alone. The story of that night of terror, at the abandoned house outside the town of Havenwood, had become a local legend. It was said that on full moon nights, a woman in a white dress could still be seen standing in the window of the house, waiting for the next victim. And Sarah, the young girl who had almost been a victim that night, never dared to walk alone at night again. Every time the night fell, she remembered the cold gaze of the ghostly woman, and fear welled up in her heart again. The next day, the weak sunlight tried to penetrate the thick curtains in Sarah's apartment, but it was not enough to dispel the heavy and gloomy atmosphere. Sarah was still wearing yesterday's clothes, wrinkled and dirty. She sat huddled on the sofa, hugging a pillow to her chest, her eyes dark from lack of sleep and fear. Emily was making a cup of hot tea in the kitchen, occasionally glancing at Sarah with worried eyes. They had not slept all night, the terrifying images haunting their minds. "Sarah, have some tea," Emily said, her voice soft, placing the cup on the table in front of Sarah. "It will make you feel better." Sarah shook her head slightly. "I don't want anything, Emily. I just want this to never happen." Emily sat down next to Sarah, hugging her shoulders. I know, Sarah. I wish I did. But we're safe. The police are investigating. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Emily opened it, and a middle-aged man in a trench coat entered. He had a stern face and sharp eyes. "Hello, ladies," he said, his voice deep. "I'm Detective Miller, from the Havenwood Police Department. I've come to ask you more about last night's incident." Sarah and Emily invited Detective Miller to sit down. They told the story again, in more detail and more carefully. Detective Miller listened attentively, occasionally asking questions. "You said you saw a ghostly woman?" Detective Miller asked Sarah, his voice tinged with disbelief. Sarah shivered at the memory of that terrifying image. "Yes, Detective, I'm sure of it. She wasn't human. Very cold and scary." Emily interjected. "I saw her too, Detective. She was crouching near Sarah when I arrived. I shined my flashlight on her, and she backed away." Detective Miller nodded, writing something down in his notebook. "And the man who kidnapped you, Sarah? We found his car near the abandoned house. There were signs of a struggle inside." Sarah recounted the man in detail, from the moment she met him on the street until he took her to the house. She tried to remember every detail she could, hoping it would help the police find him. He was killed by that woman," Sarah said, her voice choking. "I saw something black come out of him." Detective Miller was silent for a moment, looking at Sarah with a questioning gaze. "We examined the scene at that house. We found a body, just as you described, but there were no signs of a normal homicide. The body was strange, like the life had been drained." Hearing Detective Miller's words, Sarah and Emily looked at each other in horror. They knew that what they had experienced was not a dream. So, was it a ghost? "Detective?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Detective Miller sighed. "I'm not sure, Emily. We'll continue to investigate. We'll try to find out what really happened at that house." After Detective Miller left, Sarah and Emily sat in silence for a long time. The atmosphere in the apartment was still heavy and tense. "What do you think, Emily?" Sarah asked, her voice low. "Was it really a ghost?" Emily hugged Sarah tightly. "I don't know, Sarah. All I know is that we went through something terrible. We were lucky to survive." "But why me?" Sarah asked, tears starting to fall. "Why did this happen to me?" "I don't know, Sarah," Emily said, her voice sad. "Maybe we were just in the wrong place at the wrong time." The next few days passed in anxiety and fear. Sarah didn't dare leave the house alone. She always felt like someone was watching her, lurking in the dark. She often had nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night with a scream stuck in her throat. Emily stayed by Sarah's side, trying to comfort and encourage her. Together, they researched the history of the abandoned house, hoping to find some clues about the ghostly woman. They found some information online and at the local library. The house had been abandoned for many years. It had previously belonged to a wealthy family, but a terrible tragedy had occurred there. According to what they learned, in the late 19th century, a woman named Eleanor lived in the house. She suffered from a strange disease that made her skin pale and her body always feel cold. Her husband, a rich and cruel man, locked her in an upstairs room, leaving her to die. Locals rumored that Eleanor's spirit still haunted the house, seeking revenge. They said that anyone who dared to approach the house at night would encounter bad luck. Hearing this story, Sarah felt a strange sympathy for the woman named Eleanor. Perhaps that was why she did not harm Sarah, but punished the man instead. However, fear did not leave Sarah. She still felt Eleanor's cold gaze following her. She knew that she had encountered a supernatural force, and her life would never be the same again. One evening, when Sarah was sitting alone in her apartment, she heard a strange noise coming from outside the window. She timidly looked out, and she saw a white figure standing under the dim moonlight, looking straight into her apartment. Sarah screamed in horror, backing away from the window. She knew that Eleanor had found her, and this time, she might not be as lucky as before. After the night of seeing the white figure under the moonlight, Sarah lived in extreme terror. She hardly dared to sleep, and every time she did, she dreamed of Eleanor's pale face and deep black eyes. Emily had moved in with Sarah to care for and comfort her friend, but her presence could not dispel the constant feeling of unease in Sarah's heart. One evening, when Emily went out to buy food, Sarah sat alone in the living room, trying to read a book to forget what had happened. But no matter how hard she tried, her mind kept returning to the abandoned house and the terrifying image of Eleanor. Suddenly, Sarah felt a cold wind blowing through the room. Even though the windows were closed, she shivered. Looking up and around, everything was normal, but she could not shake the feeling that someone was here, watching her. Sarah stood up, pacing around the room, trying to reassure herself. "It's just my imagination," she muttered, but her voice sounded weak and uncertain. As she passed the large mirror at the end of the room, she stopped. She saw her own reflection in the mirror. But behind her, in the darkness, she caught a glimpse of a woman in a white dress. Sarah turned quickly, but there was no one there. She stared at the mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm hallucinating," she told herself, but she knew deep down that what she had seen was real. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, listening to every little sound in the apartment. Emily slept soundly beside her, but Sarah couldn't sleep. Around midnight, Sarah was awakened by a strange noise coming from the living room. It was a soft noise, like someone shuffling across the wooden floor. Sarah sat up timidly, listening. The noise came again, this time more clearly. Sarah woke Emily. "Emily, did you hear something?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Emily rubbed her eyes, sleepily asking, "What did you hear, Sarah?" "I didn't hear anything. There was a noise in the living room," Sarah said, looking anxiously toward the door. I think it was Eleanor." Emily woke up and sat up in bed, listening. A moment later, they both heard light footsteps coming from the living room. "Oh my God," Emily whispered, her face pale. "I heard it too." The two girls listened in silence, their hearts pounding. The footsteps drew closer, then stopped right in front of the bedroom door. Sarah and Emily hugged each other tightly, holding their breaths in anticipation. The door slowly opened, and in the dim moonlight streaming in from the window, they saw the familiar silhouette of a woman in a white dress. Eleanor stood silently in the doorway, her dark eyes staring at Sarah. There was no expression on her pale face, but Sarah could sense a deep sadness and loneliness radiating from the woman. What do you want?" Sarah asked, stuttering, trying to keep her voice from shaking. Eleanor didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at Sarah intently. Then slowly, she raised her hand, her long, thin fingers trembling in the air. Sarah shivered. She knew that Eleanor hadn't come to harm her. Maybe she wanted to say something. Emily squeezed Sarah's hand, trying to reassure her friend. "We're okay, Sarah. I'm here with you." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "Eleanor, do you need any help?" she asked, her voice softer. The ghostly woman nodded slightly, then slowly turned and walked towards the living room. She glided away lightly, like a white mist. Sarah and Emily looked at each other, then decided to follow Eleanor. They walked out of the bedroom, carefully following the white figure that was floating in the living room. Eleanor led them to a wall in the living room. She reached out to touch the wall, then slowly disappeared inside. Sarah and Emily looked at each other in surprise. She just walked through the wall? Emily whispered. Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of curiosity and fear rising in her. She walked closer to the wall, touching the spot where Eleanor had disappeared. The wall was cold and solid. Nothing special, but when Sarah pressed lightly on a loose brick, she felt a slight vibration. She pressed harder, and a small click was heard. A part of the wall slowly slid aside, revealing a secret passage. Sarah and Emily looked at each other in surprise. They had never known that their apartment had a secret passage like this. Without hesitation, Sarah took the flashlight and stepped into the dark passage. Emily followed behind, holding Sarah's hand tightly. They walked along the narrow, damp hallway, not knowing what awaited them ahead. The deeper they went, the colder they felt. The smell of mold and dust became stronger, making it hard to breathe. At the end of the hallway, they saw an old wooden door. Eleanor was standing there, waiting for them. She nodded slightly, signaling them to open the door. Sarah trembled as she reached out to grasp the cold doorknob. She took a deep breath, then slowly opened the door. A small room appeared before their eyes, and what they saw inside horrified them to the core. The secret room was small and damp, with no windows, only a flickering oil lamp placed on an old wooden table. The weak light fell on the mottled walls, covered with dust and cobwebs. But what horrified Sarah and Emily the most were the things scattered throughout the room. Old rag dolls, scribbled pictures of strange figures, and especially a small bed, on which lay a yellowed and torn white dress. Sarah felt a vague sadness invade her heart. This room seemed to be the shelter of a lonely and miserable child. Eleanor stood in the middle of the room, looking at Sarah and Emily with sad eyes. She pointed at the bed, then slowly disappeared, dissolving into the air. Sarah and Emily moved closer to the bed. Emily touched the white dress, the fabric thin and cold. This must be the dress she wore when she was alive, Emily whispered, her voice choked. Sarah looked around the room, trying to imagine Eleanor's life. A little girl locked in this room, alone facing her fear and loneliness. On the wooden table, Sarah saw a small diary, the cover worn old. She timidly picked it up, opened it. The shaky handwriting, the ink blurred by time, appeared before her eyes. Sarah began to read the diary, her voice choked with emotion. It was Eleanor's diary, telling of her miserable life, when her father locked her in this room because of a strange illness. She wrote about her fear of the dark, about her loneliness, about her longing to be loved. October 1888, Sarah read, her voice trembling. Daddy yelled at me again today. He said I was a freak, a disgrace to the family. I just wanted to go out and play like the other kids. But he wouldn't let me. He locked me here, alone in the dark. I was so scared. Emily hugged Sarah tightly, both girls choking up. They understood why Eleanor had become such a vengeful spirit. Sarah continued reading the diary, the lines becoming darker and more desperate. Eleanor wrote about how her illness was getting worse, how she felt cold and weak. She begged her father, but he was still cold and cruel. December 1888, Sarah continued reading. I feel so cold, cold to the bone. I don't think I can stand it anymore. I miss my mother. I wish she were here with me. The last lines in the diary were written on a cold winter day. Eleanor wrote about how she felt her breathing getting weaker and weaker. And she knew she was going to die. "I don't want to die alone. I'm scared," were Eleanor's last words. Sarah closed the diary, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked around the room, feeling an immense pity for poor Eleanor. "We have to help her," Sarah said, her voice determined. "We have to help her spirit rest." Emily nodded in agreement. "But what should we do?" Sarah thought for a moment. Then she saw an old rag doll lying on the bed. She picked it up, feeling a strange connection to the old toy. Maybe this was something important to her. Sarah said, "Let's take it out and bury it. Maybe that will help her spirit rest." Sarah and Emily carefully wrapped the rag doll in a handkerchief, then carried it out of the secret room. They closed the wooden door, and Sarah pushed the loose brick back into place, hiding the secret passage. When they returned to the living room, they felt that the atmosphere had become lighter. The cold and gloomy feeling had disappeared. They decided to take the doll to the backyard and bury it under an old tree. Emily dug a small hole, and Sarah gently placed the doll in it. After burying the doll, Sarah and Emily stood still for a while. Remembering Eleanor, they felt a strange peace envelop them. Suddenly, they saw a soft white light appear above the tree. The light slowly took the form of a little girl in a white dress, with a delicate face and kind eyes. Eleanor smiled at Sarah and Emily, a bright and warm smile. Then, slowly, the little girl raised her hand to wave goodbye to them, before disappearing into thin air. Sarah and Emily looked at each other, both feeling a sense of joy and peace in their hearts. They knew that Eleanor's spirit had finally been put to rest. From that night on, Sarah was no longer haunted by terrifying dreams. Her apartment was no longer cold and gloomy. She knew that Eleanor was gone, and that she had found the peace she had always longed for. Sarah and Emily decided to keep the secret room and the story of Eleanor a secret. They wanted her to truly rest in peace, without anyone bothering her anymore. But they would never forget that terrible night, and the spirit of poor Eleanor that haunted them. The story of the abandoned house and the ghostly woman is still told by the people of Havenwood to this day, as a reminder of the dark secrets that can lurk right next to their normal lives.